probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Critch, but.
What's up, y'all? I'm Bud Elliott. This is my college football summer school series here on the Cover 3 podcast. And today I'm talking to South Carolina. No better place to go for that than the Big Spur. I'm bringing on my man, Hale McGranahan. What's going on, dude?
Not a whole lot. How are you doing?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Just in the middle of season preview mode. It's kind of late in May here. I'm not really sure when we're going to run this, but we got the house case happening today for reference. And yet I really just want to focus on season preview. Once I'm in it, and I'm excited to talk South Carolina. That I'm kind of liking this team, which I like it. When I was doing my research, I'm like, okay, I got a lot of positive stuff here to ask him about. I'll start first. How do you expect this team to look different than it looked last year?
I think they could be more run-oriented with no Spencer Rattler at quarterback and Rocket Sanders in at running back and Lenore Sellers, who's going to be the starting quarterback, who's got some legs that he can utilize. He's going to help make this thing go on the ground. Whether or not that's going to be, KJ Jefferson at Arkansas when that thing was really humming a couple years ago, or somewhere not quite at that level. I think they're going to be really good running the ball, and especially if Rocket is back fully healthy, came in with a shoulder injury, and should be ready to roll by August camp or even during June workouts. So I think more run-oriented is the place to start, and they should be pretty good on defense as well. So they got those two things going for them for sure right now.
I remember last year watching the spring game, and we had done summer school shortly thereafter, and I was just a little bit depressed for South Carolina, for lack of a better word, about the offensive line when their left tackle, Nichols, I think it was, went down in that spring game. It was like, oh, shoot. I remember doing the series, like they can't afford to lose anybody. What's the outlook for the offensive line this year with a couple guys back?
I think they're going to be better. Last year, you mentioned the injury, and that was sort of a preview of what was to come. They got pretty banged up throughout the season, so they were mixing and matching all along the way and ended up having to roll with a couple freshmen, and there were certainly some issues throughout the season. But if they can stay healthy, and I would think some of those guys who played a lot last year, and Trevon Ball played a lot of guard, and Tree Babalata, who ended up starting at left tackle for majority of the season, you would think those guys would both be better as sophomores, and they hit the portal pretty hard for some interior offensive linemen, and they got a really highly rated recruit in Josiah Thompson who could end up being the left tackle of the future or even the present for this season. I think they're going to be better that way, and the key is just staying healthy. I've said that a lot this offseason, and talking about this team and what it could look like in 24, and I think there's going to be some improvement up front on the line of scrimmage, both sides of the ball for that matter, but definitely on the offensive line as long as everybody's healthy.
Feels like just looking at the makeup of this roster with the size of Sellers and the size of Sanders, although I read on the Big Spur that he's lost some weight from where he was at Arkansas, that physicality is probably going to be really increased for this offense. How do you think that plays into the play action game that they'll try to run?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of why I snuck in that KJ Jefferson mention a little while ago. I think that's going to be pretty beneficial for Sellers, who redshirt freshman, and he's still learning how to play quarterback at this level. I think they've got some guys who definitely can make plays vertically in that play action game, whether it's Nick Harbor or Gage Larvadain, who transferred in from Miami of Ohio, and a handful of other guys who can really run. Certainly some question marks at receiver, but they do have sort of the tools, I guess, to make that an effective part of the offense. And as long as, again, the line can hold up, I think that we're going to see a team that's able to take advantage of those types of scenarios.
You mentioned Gage from Miami, Ohio. I knew some guys on Miami, Ohio's staff last year, and they would tell me, like, this guy is killing us in practice. And even when he played Miami in that opening, wasn't opening weekend, but one of the first games of the year, had a big game against them. And when he was in, that Miami, Ohio offense was kind of decent. And when he was out with injury, it was really not decent. So I'm excited to see what he can do in the SEC, but he definitely looked like he was outclassing the MAC for sure. But we'll swap over to the defensive side. I was talking to Cole Kublik the other day of SEC Network on the phone, and I was going through our prep, and I like to pick his brain on SEC stuff, and has a lot of respect for what he does. I was like, man, how many SEC D tackle rooms would you really take over South Carolina? Like, I don't know if they're amazing, but they're pretty like bankable as a knowable asset with some upside.
Yeah, a lot of guys in that room who either committed to or signed with Will Muschamp. So they've been around for a very long time. Last season, South Carolina's run defense was like 7th in the SEC in a couple of different stat categories. So Tonka Hemingway is probably the best of the group. TJ Sanders, who really came on last year, especially in that Georgia game. Boogie Huntley, who's been around since that 2020 signing class. They added DeAndre Jules from the portal, played at Pittsburgh, who's going to give them some more depth, and a guy, Monkel Goodwine from Alabama, who didn't play a lot there, but if you're plugging him in as a rotation guy at South Carolina, I think probably going to feel pretty good about that. So they've got a lot of guys who've played a lot of football, and they've had some pretty good success too. So they're pretty strong right there for sure.
One position I have in my notes that I'm not really sure what to make heads or tails of is linebacker. How do you see that shaking out for the Gamecocks?
Yeah, Debo Williams is back. He was all SEC last season and was really solid. They lost a couple guys to the portal on Stone Blanton and Pup Howard, but they feel really good about the two guys who were essentially their replacements. And Demetrius Knight, who played at Charlotte last season after spending the first 3 or 4 years of his career at Georgia Tech, played quarterback in high school, so he was working in a new position in Georgia Tech, then really had a good season last year at Charlotte. Then Bengali Kamara, another Pittsburgh transfer who they feel really good about that's going to add to that conversation. And but they went to some 3-3-5 types of looks at the end of last season, and a guy who really emerged during that time was Bam Martin Scott, who's been around from the first signing class for Shane Beamer. So they've got, again, a lot of guys that they can run through there, and I think they feel good about where they're at. Guys who are big and can run and make some plays. So I think that front 6 or 7, however it's constructed, is going to be pretty solid. And linebacker is a position of strength on this team. See,
that's one of the reasons why I love doing this, right? I mean, I obviously the top guy, but like the rest of them, I was like, I don't really know who's going to be good here, and that's why we have our 24/7 sports experts like yourself. You mentioned going to the 3-3-5 some. Was that because they liked who they could get on the field, or was it sort of a response to maybe a lack of pass rush in certain situations? And if it's the latter, where do you expect the pass rush to come from this season?
A little bit of both. But to answer that second part of your question, Bud, is it's going to come from conceivably Gilbert Edmond, who transferred to Florida State last year after starting at South Carolina. And he was a starter on that 2022 defense that helped them win 8 games and in the regular season. And I think he's just him coming in is going to make that position group better, because he would have definitely been a starter last season. And then they got Kyle Kennard from Georgia Tech, who's had a pretty solid college career. And again, like if you have both those guys on this defense last year, they win at least one more game, namely the Florida game, if not more. And yeah, I think it's going to be better. I don't know how much better, but I definitely am of the belief that we'll see a pass rush that's significantly improved, because last year it was pretty bad, quite frankly, and there's really not anywhere to go but up.
All right, so let's fast forward about a month from now. We're at SC Media Days in Dallas. Who's the guy who's not going to get voted from South Carolina onto the preseason All-SEC team who you think would be there come the postseason, the final one?
Ooh. I'd probably go with one of the safeties either Nicky Manwari or Jalen Kilgore, who I call him a safety, but he's going to play nickel and played a lot of nickel last year. I would say one of those two guys. They're both really good, and I think they're probably going to get overlooked just for whatever reason. Those are two names that immediately popped to mind.
Makes sense to me. So, I mean, this schedule, right? No Georgia, no Texas. South Carolina is one of the 4 SEC teams that gets Vanderbilt as a road game, and like with all due respect to Vanderbilt, that is still quite a blessing if one of your 4 SEC road games is in Nashville. All 4 SEC home games, I think, if South Carolina is, let's say they meet like their 70th or 80th percentile projection of what they could be, are very winnable home games. 3 should be gimmies in the non-conference, and a Clemson team that still hasn't discovered the transfer portal and looks maybe more beatable than ever. What's the best case scenario for the South Carolina team?
I think excuse me. I think it's a very manageable schedule. It's challenging for sure, obviously. But week 2, you play at Kentucky. I think that's a toss-up game, even though South Carolina will probably be the underdog. Following week, you got LSU at home. Same thing. I mean, they're probably going to be an underdog. South Carolina will be, but very winnable game. LSU's defense is probably going to be suspect again. October will be challenging. I mean, I think that Ole Miss game is probably in that lose category already. Then back-to-back weeks to close out the month, you got to go to Alabama, to Oklahoma, which this team struggled last October when they had to play Florida at home, then go back-to-back weeks, Missouri and A&M on the road. So it's tough, but like I said, I think it's pretty manageable with the way it starts out. If you can be 3-1 in September, try to keep your nose above water in October, then get to November when you have A&M at home, Vanderbilt on the road, Wofford and at Clemson, which are all obviously very winnable games. So just got to hope for a winning record in that first month and see what shakes out in October, and let it play itself out in November.
Yeah, I was playing with some of my simulations here. I'm like, I don't think they're going 8-4, but there are certain worlds in which I guess if other teams stumble a little bit and South Carolina plays a little bit, above maybe kind of its midline potential there, that this really could break nicely for them. I'm so glad you mentioned kind of treading water in October, just kind of keep the eyes on the prize of improvement there. I really appreciate you coming on. I've learned so much. Is there anybody who, now that we're close to wrapping, you're like, man, Bud's an idiot. He definitely should have asked about this guy and didn't, that we need to tell folks about?
Well, I figured you would have asked about Rocket Sanders just because he was such a superstar in 2022, then had that I guess injury-filled season in 23 at Arkansas. But I think if he's able to get back to that 2022 form or anywhere close to it, we may be looking at a South Carolina team that has a pretty solid record at the end of the season. But that to me is the one name that immediately comes to mind.
For sure. One more thing I wanted to ask you about taking Robbie Ashford. Like, I was thinking about this when UCF took Ja'Cory Brown to back up KJ Jefferson, right? Like taking a backup who is sort of in the same mold as your starter, so where if your starter did go down and got dinged, had to come out for a series, you had to put a backup in, that you're not having to change up the offense. Like, do you think taking Ashford as the backup is indicative of the type of offense that they likely want to run in Seller's first year as a starter?
I think there's something to that, but honestly, Ashford wasn't the first guy they're really honed in on.
Oh,
first portal quarterback they're trying to get. The AJ Swan, the guy who was at Vanderbilt and ended up at LSU, he actually silently committed to the staff and ended up flipping to LSU. So that was kind of the first guy that they were really in on and felt like they had a chance to bring in. And he's obviously not quite that dual threat type of quarterback, but yeah, I think there is something to the line of thought you have there with Ashford being a bigger dual threat type of guy like Sellers is.
Absolutely. Really appreciate the time. Everybody needs to visit the Big Spur. Y'all do a great job over there. Really lively message board. shout out to everybody there as well. And we'll have to have you back on soon.
Appreciate it.